CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy. This is Series 1 of Conversations with Women in African Philanthropy, a CAPSI program known as Adɔyɛ. The series was recorded at the sidelines of a retreat that took place at the WITS Rural Facility in Limpopo in January 2025, hosted by CAPSI's Adɔyɛ program and Nawi AfriFem Collective. Adɔyɛ is dedicated to celebrating and amplifying the contributions of African women in philanthropy while creating spaces for dialogue, learning, and collaboration. Adɔyɛ operates under the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment, aligning its mission with broader goals of promoting effective philanthropic practices in Africa. Through its efforts, Adɔyɛ seeks to build knowledge, foster dialogue, cultivate partnerships, and advocate for policies that support women in philanthropy.
Welcome to yet another episode of our Conversations on African Philanthropy with me, Moyo. I'm really excited to be joined by Masego Madzwamuse, who is currently the Director of Environment at the Oak Foundation. Masego, welcome.
Thank you, Becky.
I've been hoping to have this conversation, been trying to find an appropriate time. I know we tried in Victoria Falls, but it couldn't happen. And we said someday it's going to happen, and tonight it's happening. So we start with the creativity that happened here. This, I'm told, is a gift from Nyamal to you.
It is.
And she's the one who curated this. But it's a special cloth to you. Let's talk about why it is special.
A significant cloth. When Yamal walked in to the space, she had this cloth wrapped around her. And I walked over to her and I said to her, oh my God, this very print takes me back to a moment in 2016. When I was in Liberia visiting a friend. In fact, it takes me to a much earlier moment in Liberia where I was visiting a friend, and I did what I always do, which is to go to the market in search of textiles, artwork, and just to talk to ordinary people and get to know about the place. And I bought this particular fabric, and I had really bought a lot of fabrics. At the time, I used to buy fabrics and I would design clothing for myself and my friends. And I was very shy about speaking of myself as a designer because people who do important work, who lead organizations, don't do things like that. They're not artists at the same time. So I led the life of an artist secretly. And this cloth was in one of the stashes of fabrics that I had bought. But then in 2016, I realized that I actually had a lot of fabric in my kist. And too many of them, and too much for me to even make clothing just for myself and a few friends. And I decided that I was going to work on a line of clothing. And one of the first outfits I made was with this print. In Liberia, they called it the Makeba print. And so the significance of it is I made that line of clothing, and then I hosted my first pop-up event in Johannesburg, in my backyard in Norwood. And that pop-up event was really successful. And we sold out quite a lot of items. And it confirmed for me that there was something there. Not only were people enthusiastic about the designs that I was working on, but they also appreciated the space that I had created and curated there. It was a space for conversations, a space for connecting. Other artists came with their works, people doing spoken art, mixologists doing their gin and tonics and coffee, and other people who were doing beadwork and all forms of art. So the significance of it was, it actually reminded me of a moment where I embraced who I am in totality. A multi-passioned individual who, I work in philanthropy. I'm a mother, but I'm also a very passionate fashion designer.
Yeah. So talking of which, I'm not so sure they are talking about the same event. I attended one of those at your place, and it sounds like that's the one. And I actually remember ordering a couple of outfits for myself, and I'm actually feeling even embarrassed that I didn't even bring one because I really like them, and I always put on them whenever I have an African event or anything. But I also attended one of your events in Geneva. I think it was Africa Day, where we again, your clothing outfits were out there in display. So let's talk about the enterprise, the Bola Nangabe enterprise. To begin with, obviously you said as somebody who was working in the civil society sector, you had to do that almost as another life, and yet it's part of you. But let's talk about the genesis, its journey, and where you are now with the creativity, the design, but that is an enterprise in itself.
So it's really an interesting one, because even the imagination of it was a collective effort, and I think an affirmation from people who had seen me do this work over years. When I say that the imagination of it was a collective effort, I actually recall being in Gaborone and sitting with a group of girlfriends, and I was trying to figure out what name I was going to give to this label. What is going to be the name? Nangabe is my middle name. It's one of my middle names. It's a name that was given to me by my maternal grandfather. It's a Sakhalagadi name that means caregiver, and a name that I was given that connects me with an extended family that lives in a place called Ukwi in the Kalahadi district. And in the social strata of Botswana, the Bakhalagadi and the Basara sit right at the bottom of the social strata. And when we talk about poverty and inequality, growing up and seeing the stark differences of the levels of development in the cities in Botswana, and what I was seeing each time we visited my grandmother in Kalahadi and in the Khansi district at the time, was to actually quite early on realize that development was not enjoyed quite equally. So this name carried a meaning for me. It was caregiver, but when we were talking about what to name the business, one of my friends said, how about we name it Speak Nangabe, speak through your creativity. And I didn't want to use the English words to explain what that would be. So I went back to my mother tongue, which is Sakhalagadi, and I named it as Bola Nangabe. Bola means speak Nangabe. But the reflection of that is speak the Salberton. Speak through creativity, speak and stand up for justice, use creative art to break down complex concepts, to bring justice to the fore, but also to bring spaces where we can speak about social justice in ways that are not threatening and are rather inviting. I've really enjoyed doing this work. So what I do is I'm very mindful about the sourcing as well of fabrics. For most of the products that I work with, we all know the complex history of African textiles and whether or not they're African to begin with. But what I like about what they represent in a lot of marketplaces in the continent is there's been a reclamation of these prints by African women in particular. So when I go to the market and I buy the pieces, I'm actually buying from a woman who's able to pay school fees for their children. They're able to pay for healthcare. They're able to put food on the table. And I then take this and create something beautiful with it and sell it on. and work with a network of self-employed tailors in Botswana and in South Africa. But it's also a way of I use it to tell stories about who we are, and as a people, where we come from, what our aspirations are. So with each piece that I design, there's usually a story that accompanies it. The origin of the cloth, what inspired the designs, the cultural relevance behind the designs. So it's more than, I like to refer to it as wearable art and textile with stories.
Yeah. In fact, I was about to ask you about what informs your designs, and you've kind of responded to that. So linked to that, I mean, I remember one of the events, there was even a panel. I'm trying to think what the issues were at that point in time. But the point I'm trying to get at is this consciousness around infusing, social justice concerns and some of the issues that you have raised with art, so that people are not just coming to buy, a particular, outfit, but they are buying it with some information, but also understanding where it has come from, but also the issues that it's seeking to achieve. And so maybe one of the questions that one might ask is, how has that experience, but also that deep conviction within yourself about the role of creativity, of art, how has that influenced the way in which you lead? I remember one of the conversations that I think I had with you was around how you are using art and creativity and design to actually manage and lead the Southern Africa Trust, and we'll come to some of those elements. But globally, when you look at your journey, how would you see the interface between the creative part of Masego and the manager, the director, the leader, the activist?
I think it goes back to the power of storytelling. And it also goes back to the importance of understanding that not everything is linear, and creativity gives you that kind of space. And in environments where, the work that I have led, or the context in which I've been a leader, have been in the space of social justice, it's in the environment and in the conservation space and in the civil society space. And in most of those spaces, we deal with complexity. And in order to unravel complexity and find solutions, it really does require creativity and a lot of flexibility in that. And I think that what has allowed me to be able to build resilient teams and for us to find solutions in contexts where we think that we might be dealing with problems that are so complex has to do with the fact that I have a creative mind and I can often picture what this vision might look like and the multiple dimensions within which we can achieve the outcomes that we have set ourselves out for, including alternative pathways. That I think is really important. And creativity also means that while one sets out a vision, to leave space for others to come along and help you create this much bigger and more beautiful story. And I think that's why the story that I tell about how the name was even birthed is quite significant. Is I did not sit on my own and say, I've got this beautiful idea, how am I going to monetize it? I sat down with a group of other friends and we were brainstorming and teasing out. I very much lead in the same way, that I co-create ideas with the teams that I lead. And in a way, lead from behind as well, and trust the process and trust other people to run with the process. So coming back to the event that you say that you were talking about, Becky, I was smiling because I recalled that was one of the events, the last events. It was the last event that I hosted at my home before I moved to Geneva. And we had organized a panel discussion. I recall the title of that was Uhuru through the creative arts and the creative sector. And it was May 25th, Africa Day. Again, another Africa Day that we were celebrating in the continent. And what we did was to bring back the question of politics of development, politics of space and politics of being from different perspectives. If you recall, we had somebody, we had Rehema Isa, who came and spoke about the journey of Oya Foods. And Oya Foods was all about bringing back our indigenous food systems into the public domain and into mainstream. And they were introducing indigenous foods into our retail sector. And that's a significant and important part of the discourse of what it means to transform our food systems at different levels. We're changing the system, but we're also doing it creatively through dialogue, through the enterprises, but also memory and reviving cultural practices that are not harmful and are still relevant for modernity. We also had Kofi Kwaku, I recall, and Kofi Kwaku, as you know, is a facilitator. He's an artist, and he does scenario planning. And he was bringing his insights from driving change in global policy processes, and how he uses art form to actually get people to imagine alternative futures and to have robust strategies that get us into a space where as civil society we are not always caught up in a reactive mode. And Kofi is a facilitator that I have worked with in my various leadership roles. I used him as a strategy facilitator when I was working for the Open Society Foundations. I used him as a strategy facilitator for the Southern Africa Trust. And I think that using that creativity, we landed the trust in rethinking its role in the future of re-granting entities or within the philanthropy ecosystem. And dealing with new questions and imagining itself as a new organization after a tenure of, say, a 15-year period. I think creativity and art is allowing, it's expansive, and it's inclusive.
And for some, and I'm sure this could also resonate with you, creativity and art is also a way of diffusing moments of conflicts. So for example, I know that at the level at which you were leading the trust, you were bound to have some moments where you just have to diffuse conflict, whether it's at a governance level, staff level, partnership level. And I just want to see how certain moments of your leadership, or your moments of being at the helm of certain institutions like the trust, you resorted to art and creativity to diffuse the moment. I had to sneak that one in.
So some of that diffusing the moment involved us thinking about. I actually recall one of the conversations we were having. We were going through a strategy refresher process. And the trust had become highly technical. Without seeing it as a criticism, I recall saying to my senior leadership and the board that I felt that at some point we were emulating even the governments that we were critiquing. We had become more government than the governments themselves, so to speak, or SADC, in a way mimicking the structure of SADC. And I went back to what I think is a comfortable place for many of us, which is the power of storytelling. And to go through a process with the board. Thank you to Kofi's able facilitation, was to go through a process with the board where we were recalling for each and every one of us personal stories and going deep into our memories, where the question was, what is the earliest memory you have for when you realized that poverty wasn't right or that justice matters to you? And for many people, they went back to recalling those moments, either as they were growing up or something that they noticed in their journey. And by so doing, we were connecting that issue with what people deeply care about at a personal level and their values. So by doing that, it shifts the conversation from what the CEO, the direction that the CEO is trying to get the organization to, then it becomes a personal conviction that each and every individual within that organization can align to. And at the end of that process, I recall a number of people, one of the statements that came up was, poverty is something that should make all of us angry and unleash our personal agency. And in unleashing our personal agency is recognizing how urgent it is to do something about it. That is the one thing. The other was the power of discourse and narrative, right? And ideas that resonate. And especially when we were engaging with donors, right? And the wider community, one of the things that I got to realize was 15 years of existence at the time, and the Southern Africa Trust wasn't well known outside its usual circles. It was an organization that really did great work, but it was one of the best kept secrets. Under your tenure, Becky, the trust had a significant win in getting a regional policy on the portability of social protection funds. How many people knew that story?
Very few.
That migrant labor that worked in the mines could get access to their benefits, to their pensions, to their social grants, and that what it had taken was the trust being intentional about being intentional about identifying the problem, but also sticking around for the solutions, right? And when the insurance company said, we're not paying out these insurances, these benefits, because we don't know where the miners are, the trust set up an initiative to trace the beneficiaries and helped the ex-miners to form associations and organizations and collectives where they could work with the power of numbers to put pressure on the system. But those stories were largely untold. And I invested a lot at the time in getting those stories captured, in getting the people who were directly affected to tell their own stories directly with very little interception. I guess because I appreciate the power of arts, that I understand that it does tug on the heartstrings, really, is the quickest way to get to people's hearts and minds.
So we'll try and come back to the trust phase of your journey, but still maybe sticking a bit with on the segment of art and creativity. We are here now in Limpopo, partly in Mpumalanga, so to speak, at the First Rural Facility, and you are one of the architects of the reason why we're here with a group of women from all walks of life, from across geographies in Africa, beyond, including those from the Caribbean. Literally to start a year with a group of women coming together to reflect and do a bit of writing. Maybe take us through the conceptualization of the project, where it came, what informed it, how, I only heard this morning that you and Koto know each other through Facebook. All along I thought there are two conspirators, they met somewhere, they discussed this thing, but it comes out you only met on Facebook. But here we are. So maybe take us through the genesis and development of the idea to where we are. I think at some point you said to me this is almost like a 3-year journey. So maybe let's talk about that.
So when I say this is almost a three-year journey, and I do want to come to the point about how Koto and I meet. Some years back, I did a fellowship with Aspen, the Aspen New Voices Fellowship.
Yeah.
And that fellowship was about bringing voices of the global South to global discourse and lifting those voices to influence policy. And it was a fellowship that highlighted and profiled global leaders who were based in the global South in various sectors. And through that fellowship, we were given training, media training for non-media experts, journalistic training for non-journalists. And the importance of doing that was to help us with a couple of things. One was in we already had a voice, in using our voice more effectively to influence global discourse. And we were offered a number of tools for doing that. Storytelling through the Moth, writing op-eds, and a number of us wrote op-eds. And then we were also introduced to a program that was birthed by Paula Frey, which was 100 Days of Writing.
Yeah.
And what Paula Frey said to us was, everyone has a story, and every story deserves to be told. And she also highlighted to us the importance of stories of people from the continent who are involved in civil society and leading various causes, to tell their story and to make sure that those stories are captured, they are documented, and they inform part of the global narrative that is driving various policy efforts. And at the time, I started working on, I had the idea to work on, I wanted to work on my father's, on a memoir documenting my father's story. The importance of telling that story was, for me, it took me back to why social justice matters to me. And having observed him as a liberation fighter and everything that he stood for and the values that he had taught me. And after that 100 days of writing, life happens. You get back to being really busy, and this project stalled. And I had this frustration of, and that was a personal project. But I also had a lot of op-eds or conversations that were taking place in the global funding space on climate that for me deserved much longer conversations. And realizing as well that it seemed that the discussion at the global level, in the global funding space on climate, was very different from the conversations that we had been having in the continent. And I began to ask myself, where is the narrative that comes from our people?
Yeah.
Where are those conversations taking place? Where are they being documented? Why are they not being referenced, or who is referencing them? And I knew that a lot of people were working on pieces of work and bodies of work and just didn't have the time and the resources to complete them. Time for a lot of leaders in the civil society space for that kind of work is a luxury. I think you would know that with a number of people who sign up for the PhD and the masters. So this idea was birthed that we need space for people to be able to write and share their really rich and valuable insights, because those ideas really matter for driving the direction of policies that are important for transformation, and that discourse is missing globally. Where Koto and I then meet is, I would post some of these issues on Facebook, or post a picture of the moon and write something about what that moon signifies and the name of the different phases of the moon in Setswana, what it means for planting seasons and things like that. But also very short reflective poems and pieces about issues that were topical or of concern to me. And Koto was doing the same. And we would comment on each other's posts because we had mutual friends in common. And then eventually I asked Koto, where do you write? Where do you publish? And Koto says she's self-published. She had just published a collection of poetry. But she was also concerned about the lack of spaces for African women to do this kind of work. And back in March, so we exchanged contact numbers on Facebook. And in March 2023, we eventually chat off Facebook, and we have a call on WhatsApp, and we are exchanging about the work that we are writing. I'm telling her about the work that I've been writing about on climate adaptation, resilience, identity, social justice over the years, and the politics of climate policy. And she was writing about the politics of the body, women's rights, and supporting young, women's rights activists in Liberia. And we just got to a point where we said, I think we need more of these conversations, but most importantly, because nobody ever really remembers what we said in panel discussions, we need to be able to document these. And we agreed to set up, to work on a writers collective. It has taken a while, but interestingly, when we finally put together a very light 2-pager concept, every donor we approached, including yourselves, they immediately said yes, because I think they also identified, they saw that need.
Yeah. And so what are the objectives of the project? And maybe again, what is it that you are hearing now that you have brought this group of women? What are you hearing? Do you think your objectives are being met? Or,
it's still sinking for me, because I think it's really quite significant. Joyce Nyairo, one of the facilitators, reminded us that this is a rare moment, and I think we hadn't fully recognized that. We had not really fully recognized the significance of it. And every woman who is in this space has said a number of things, is that it's been a very cathartic process. They found the writing process to be a very healing process. It has been a very clarifying process, but it's also one that allows them to finish off significant works that are important for the various fields that they're in. One of the things that they have said, and we were really quite unsure about the timing of the retreat, being at the beginning of the year when people are still on holiday. But for most people, they've said that it's just the right way to start off the year, because one, it allows them to map up the bodies of work that they want to write on. I mean, people are writing about different subjects that are reflective of the breadth of the field and the areas that women in the continent are leading on. We have women writing on healing practices, peace building and healing practices. We have women who are writing children's stories that are talking about the heroes, uncelebrated heroes that are in our midst, that enable children to see leaders, thought leaders and solutions providers that look and sound like them. but also to document the history and the wisdom that comes from the continent. I think that for intergenerational transfer of knowledge is really important. We have people who are writing on public health, and these are colleagues that have been very instrumental in the work that the WHO is doing, and the work around access to vaccines in the continent, vaccines and artificial intelligence in the continent. And in being in a creative space is also being able to find language that is accessible and takes us out of the sectors, and we can write not just for ourselves, but write in a way that would resonate and ensure that these issues make up part of the public discourse. We have people writing on climate. We have people that are writing creatively about the politics of the global governance space, the UN space, CSW, sexual and reproductive rights. All of these issues are important. And to have that breadth of knowledge in one room, but also to have a process of documenting and taking time out to just sit with our thoughts and put them on paper is liberating, not just for ourselves, but as a contribution. You talk about the objectives. One of the things that our facilitators have said they want to do is to have an anthology come out of the process. We have our peers and colleagues at the Nawi Collective planting a seed about, is there a possibility of having a journal and an anthology where we get to publish more often, bring new voices. The idea with this, and Becky, feel free to interrupt me at any point, is the idea with the Writers' Retreat is we don't want it to be a once-off. And we also do not want to be reaching out to the same people every year. Is to keep it growing and to keep it evolving and bring in new voices, provide new opportunities. Because Africans are storytellers inherently, and we really have a wealth of information that needs to be documented. So we've got this cohort now, and we're hoping that next year in January we will bring another new cohort, mix it with some people from this one, and to at least try and do this twice a year so that we can provide more opportunities.
So we've spoken to a couple of women today, and some of the things that they've said is they've found it useful because it's partly writing but also partly resting. So the combination of writing and resting. So one said you can't write when you are tired. So that's the first. The second is writing and healing. That at times you are asking people to write, but as they think about what to write, they're digging deeper into at times traumatic experiences where somebody said to them, you can't write. Maybe at high school or something. And so the need for us going forward to think about making sure that we also accompany them with some professional, I would say, facility for counseling and dealing with trauma or where people are triggered. Something that I think most of us would not have thought of when thinking about a project of this nature, that when you are bringing people to write, you should also think about facilities or services around counseling. So that's something that I found to be eye-opening today when I spoke to one of the participants.
That's very much part of feminist ethos and feminist ways of being, is to think about the person as in a holistic way and creating spaces in a holistic way. And really quite interestingly is the participants in this cohort have been very generous with the various skills and tools that they bring. We have Nyamal with us, who is a healer and does healing practice from many years of the work that she's been doing in peace building. And we had a very tight budget, and the first thing that went was, of course, we cut out the budget that we had set aside for the healers to come with us. And Nyamal has lended that resource to the rest of the group. We have Yuget, who is a public health expert, but she's also a trained yogi who offers yoga classes. We have people who are walking enthusiasts. And every morning we have been walking for an average of 6.6 kilometers.
And the culprits are here in the room.
The culprits are here in the room. Some days those walks feel longer than others. But in those walks as well, is because we're in such a relaxed setting, we get to share ideas. And there have been many moments where, even for me, where I've been dealing with a writer's block, I am walking and I'm, that idea comes to me, and I can come back to my room and pick up that work again. It really feels like a luxury, and I wish that for these groups of women, we didn't have to carve out time to do this kind of work, that we can build it into the ways in which we build institutions. I mean, Hope Chikudu, who is one of the great facilitators within the feminist space, talks about building organizations and institutions with a soul. And those kinds of institutions build in mental well-being care into the work environment and into the work day and into work policies. And I'm actually glad to see that even outside of feminist spaces, I think COVID was a blessing in disguise, in the sense that a number of organizations have introduced those kinds of things into their policies. Like, you can actually take a couple of days off and go and write without having to take that from your annual leave, or to go listen to podcasts, to go on a retreat, because I think institutions are inherently understanding that the mental health and mental well-being is really just important for productivity as well.
So I want us to move to what I would probably, maybe not so much interesting things, because the creative side, the left brain, is always the fascinating one. But there's the technical side of things that your life has also been involved in. You have an illustrious career. So maybe we start with where you are now and work backwards. So you joined the Oak Foundation a few years, I think it was at 20...
in 2021.
2021. As the director for the environment program. Maybe let's talk about what your program focuses on, but also largely, for those that don't know the Oak Foundation, what is its mandate? What does it work on? I also noticed, I never checked your budget. I saw your budget. It's a fascinating budget. Let's talk about your program and the Oak Foundation.
Yes. And by the way, I don't separate the two, the creative from the director of the environment program. That's
like good to hear.
Yes, I like to say, like, the creative side is a creative outlet that actually unleashes and fuels this energy that goes into the technical work. So the Oak Foundation is a family foundation. Last year we celebrated 40 years, 40 years of the foundation, and it's a foundation that works across a number of social justice areas, and supports. So we've got programs that cover human rights programs. We are funding the area of women's rights, the issues affecting women program, housing and homelessness, preventing child abuse, and learning differences. Those are some of the programs that we work on. And then, of course, we support the environment, the environment program. And the objective of the environment program is, at a higher level, we talk about supporting processes and supporting us collectively to restore our relationship with nature. And in restoring our relationship with nature, we have sub-programs or are working at 3 subsystems that hold the greatest promise for transformation. It's transforming food systems, it's accelerating energy transition and dealing with the climate crisis, and then it's within the nature systems. And under those 3 big subsystems, we essentially have 4 sub-programs. Those sub-programs are really built around the vision of the family members who sponsor the work, the trustees. It's wildlife conservation and trade, a program on wildlife conservation and trade, a program we refer to as regenerative landscapes, that is sustainable agriculture, agroecology, regenerative agriculture, and rewilding. And then we have a program, a food systems program, that covers food in terrestrial and marine ecosystems, supporting coastal communities. And then the 4th program is, oh dear, do I even remember where I started? Did I mention the climate program already? No. Yeah, the climate and energy program is the 4th program, and we work globally. For the wildlife and conservation trade work, the concept there is a concept we speak of as living landscapes, and also combating and curbing illicit wildlife trade. Why we refer to that program, we talk about living landscapes, is recognizing that in the geographies where we work with that program, Africa and Southeast Asia, a lot of the wildlife is found in rural landscapes, and wildlife resources are important for the rural economy, including livelihood strategies of locals, as well as beyond the economic benefits. So it's to support local entities and local communities in conserving the biodiversity in their localities, because that biodiversity is important for global health, global biodiversity health. And then the transforming food systems, we do that because we also realize that one of the greatest challenges that we face is food insecurity, and that food systems, food production drives climate emissions. It's one of the largest contributors to carbon emissions. So we have to really look at our production systems. We have to look at what we're eating. We have to look at how we're producing food, how we're trading food, and so forth. And then the climate program really focuses, the reason why it focuses on energy transition, it's because the fossil fuel sector is one of the culprits that are driving the climate crisis. And therefore, if we're to do anything in terms of curbing that problem, the most strategic entry point is to go into the energy transition space. And for the energy program, our geographies where we prioritize this work are the largest emitting countries, and we focus largest emitting countries in the global south, because the global south does not attract the level of funding that goes to other areas. So that's India, China, Brazil, Africa as a continent, not as a country, and then we do global policy work. The other work within the other sub-programs that I spoke about, the regenerative agriculture work is focused on Africa, and then the other work touches on global policy processes.
Yeah. So you sit at a very interesting place. Like I said, I mean, when I looked at when you joined, you were overseeing a budget of 70 million. I don't know whether it has increased or decreased, but I recently saw also a report from Climate Works looking at the funding patterns for 2023. There's still not enough funding that goes into the environment, mitigating the climate impacts, and yet we are sitting here today with one of the, I'll probably think maybe one of the greatest existential challenges of time, which is, the climate, changes and global warming, among others. I mean, we are already seeing what's happening around us. Sitting where you are sitting, is there enough that is being done to really deal with this current existential challenge?
Yeah. I think that it'd be good to start by acknowledging the significant shifts that have taken place.
Yeah.
We have seen an increase in funding that goes towards climate.
Yeah.
It's funding that goes towards climate mitigation, right? The greatest challenge that we have is, as a sector, is we tend to think about climate in silos. And yet how people experience it is not siloed.
Yeah.
It's experienced very much in an intersectional way, right? It touches on food, it touches on health, it impacts infrastructure. You know this, we've had the conversations within the various APC convenings that you have.
Yeah.
You've organized, and you've also seen, like, when a cyclone hits Mozambique, the shores of Mozambique, the ripple effects that has on the rest of the continent, and what it means in terms of eroding the gains of development.
Yeah. Yeah.
As the funding sector, we've tended to fragment the responses and fragment the resources that are then mobilized to respond to the issue. One of the challenges that we really face is really a question around how we close that gap so that the funders and the entities, civil society organizations that work on development questions and funders that work on the development agenda actually get to see that a lot of that work will not bear fruits if we don't mainstream climate, if we don't reflect on what the nexus and the interface with climate is going to be, and think about how we fund better and think about the solutions that we are highlighting.
Yeah. So maybe we can use this moment to connect with your earlier life, when at one point you were the youngest woman of color to be appointed a director of an environment international organization in Botswana. Mm-hmm. How has that phase in many ways influenced your thinking and programming today and vice versa?
Yeah. So, it's quite interesting that you link those two, because going to the Oak Foundation was very much going back to a field where I'd started. Not only that, but it was an opportunity to do at scale the bridge building that I had been working on when I worked for the Open Society, and we were looking at climate, food security in the context of climate change and what that looks like to support civil society organizations to strengthen that aspect of the work, including the body of work that I had worked with at Southern Africa Trust to build a fund for climate change, which would enable communities that live in areas that are rich in mineral resources and are sites of extraction for transition minerals to really have a voice in highlighting a number of things. One, the socio-ecological footprint of extraction, but also putting a demand on the climate and the energy, not being left behind, but the climate and the energy transition. So the work that I did at IUCN was really important, because the IUCN is a body, an organization that has state membership. So it's a global policy space where governments are shaping conservation policy and conservation priorities. But it also creates a space where there is membership of NGOs as well as the science community, and being a mediator in finding solutions. That the technical knowledge. I mean, I'm trained as an environmental scientist. That's for a start, and my master's work was on the adaptive livelihood strategies of certain communities, which were looking at what the indigenous practices were in responding to climate variability. That kind of knowledge is quite critical to understanding how people build resilience and adapt to climate change. But what is happening now is we're being confronted with the change that is happening at the scale and the speed that we have not experienced, at least in recent human history. And being at the Oak Foundation is I have an opportunity to, one, be in spaces where we are with other funders, collating the wealth of insights that we bring from our various experiences and networks to influence how priorities about funding climate are being set. So the importance of bringing those voices, the experiences, and the discourse that connects, and what I've been able to observe over an experience that spans a 20-year journey, and one that connects what people see at a local level, as well as what people are grappling with at a regional level, and what that means to do this work at a global level.
Of course, Masego, your life has been, like I said, it's illustrious. So you've been a grant maker, you've been a director, you are a thought leader, policy analyst, among other things. And so there are two phases of your life that we may not be able to cover eloquently and in depth, which are useful for our audience. One is your time at the trust, and you already began speaking to some of the issues and the work that you did there. I think the trust work is documented somewhat. We did a case study that you contributed to, so we can ask our audience to look at that case study. But there's also a nice interview that you did with Mission Talent, which also captures the time that you were there. I think it's probably the Open Society initiative for Southern Africa, where you spent quite a sizable amount of time, where perhaps there isn't much documentation of the work that you did. You were a leader there of this social and economic justice work. Are there specific highlights that you would probably want to pick on, just to tease the audience? Because I'm assuming that your writing will also at some point cover some of these aspects of your life. So we don't have to talk about everything, but at least some aspects of key highlights from both OSISA and the trust that you might just want our audience to have a look at.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Becky. I think one of the things that the work at the Open Society initiative of Southern Africa solidified for me was, firstly, that was the first time that I was a grant maker, and I got to appreciate the importance of being a grant maker in a region that I understood, and working with a team of other grant makers who were recruited from the same region that we were working in. Yeah. But also, we were quite instrumental in taking some of the issues that we were seeing in Southern Africa and contributing to a wider and global discourse. One of the things, there are two things that I want to highlight, and it goes back to why this writing retreat is important, and what I said about voice and voice influencing global discourse. The Open Society initiative or OSF is known as a human rights funder. And at the time that I was joining the Open Society Initiative of Southern Africa, there was this heated debate about first, the political and civil rights, and that's where the significant funding was going. The importance of socioeconomic rights was just emerging within the funding space. And there was always tensions about whether or not it was the business of human rights funders to fund socioeconomic rights issues. And coming from an environment sector, I also brought in the conversation around what people were terming third generation rights.
Yeah.
For me, looking at the context where we were working and the lived reality of citizens, that separation of rights was very much an artificial one, right? So leading the work of social and economic justice, and I talk about, I made reference to building bridges, I was in a space where I had the funding that enabled me to support coalitions that were drawing from movements that were in the conservation sector and movements that were in the economic justice sector. And we managed to do some of the most transformative work. An example of that transformative work was work that was born out of the continent, food security in the context of climate. And at the time, the president of the foundation had asked all programs globally to put aside resources for that work, because he wanted to see what that would look like if we were responding to this issue from different angles. And I think that work was significant because it went straight to the heart of the issue, to the structural drivers of food insecurity that nobody was willing to talk about. That's the politics of land governance, land ownership, and land rights, and how that links to food systems. But also the politics of representation in policy spaces, and what that means in terms of setting priorities for climate responses at a national level and at a national level. By the time that we ended that program, I won't really say ended that program, I would say that by the time that I left the Open Society Foundation, that had become a global conversation within OSF, and a global program was born, right? I don't think that I would have been able to understand the importance of socioeconomic rights and the relevance for the majority of the Southern African citizenry had I not benefited from the many years that I had spent working with rural communities in the conservation in the conservation sector. So I think that the supporting coalitions and understanding the importance of building people power in shifting discourse and holding decision makers accountable and putting resources behind that without shying away from it is something that I've always appreciated from my tenure at the Open Society. The other is in I think one of the things that fueled my move to Oak Foundation was, once I was at the Southern Africa Trust, it was really difficult to fundraise.
Yeah.
And yet I knew very well that there was no shortage of funding. And there was no shortage of funding. What we were grappling with was perhaps, I think, the representation of Global South voices within some of the biggest foundations in the world.
Yeah.
And when that opportunity presented itself for me to move, I understood that it meant something to be in a place where I can also influence how resources are being distributed. Yeah. And I think we've seen a shift in more and more people who are being appointed into senior positions within the global philanthropy space, is to be able to lend a voice, to bring insights, to bring experiences, to bring the stories, the examples, the solutions that are being driven from the global south into spaces that otherwise would they wouldn't be known about.
Yeah. So Masego, we need to go to the reading, but there are so many areas that we have not touched on. I'm very certain that we will need to find some other time. For example, I would really want to talk to you about challenges of leading an NGO coming from a funding institution, which is what happened to you. But I would also want to talk to you about transitions, how to transition from one organization to the other. I would love to hear about, mechanisms of mentoring. For example, as you leave the trust, Alice comes in, how does that happen? The continued system that you have provided to Alice. I would want to talk to you about so many of those things. I think earlier today, Christelle talked about how, in many ways you've been central in terms of the macroeconomic schools, feminist economics, but also Masego's politics around that, which I think some of us would love to hear. So there are so many areas that we have not touched on, and I don't think it's possible to try and do that in a podcast of this nature. So at some point we will have to figure out a time to focusing on that.
Yeah.
But I think we want.
Or you read the book when it's done.
Yeah. Masego, thank you so much for making the time. I know this is a busy time for everybody. It's also a resting time. It's a reflecting time. As you can see, it's after 8:30 in the evening and you're about to go for a reading session. Thank you for making the time and joining us for our conversations on African philanthropy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Becky.
Thank you. That was Masego Madzwamuse, who is currently with the Oak Foundation, leading the environment program. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.